Hello, and today I'm going to show you how to make a face mask. And this tutorial is for the person who doesn't normally sew. And maybe you've seen patterns online and they're a little bit confusing to you. Like, you know, with sometimes people who sew use jargon that isn't necessarily easily understandable to the non-sewer. That's kind of my category. I know how to sew, but I'm not an expert. And so if you're not an expert either, this tutorial is for you. Hopefully you have materials around the house that you can make this out of so you don't have to make a trip outside. So first off, you're going to need fabric. So this is actually pieces from a couple bed sheets. You can use even maybe a dish towel as long as it's not terry cloth, but get creative. I'm sure you have fabric around the house, and I'm sure you probably have a sheet that you're not using. Next up, you're going to need, obviously, a needle and thread if you don't have a sewing machine like I have, and you may need pins, but it's not necessary. You don't have to have that. You're going to need something to connect the mask to your face. Ideally, you would want 1/4 inch elastic. If you don't have 1/4 inch elastic, because I don't suppose a lot of people have this just laying around the house, you could use like a headband. I don't know if you've seen girls' headbands that are, they're like about this big and they're about this wide. You can use one of those and cut it up. You could use a bra strap. If you don't have anything that's, elasticy like this, you can just, instead of making a loop of fabric like I'm going to do, you can use a string and make it longer so that it actually ties in back rather than loops over your ear. So there are any number of ways you can do it. If you have questions, send me a note below and I'll try to answer them. You're also going to need to have a ruler so you can measure out your pattern. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to make your pattern. So this is my pattern. This is all it is to it. You need one piece of cloth that you're going to cut to 8 inches by 14 inches. This is just a legal size piece of paper. I cut off a 1/2 inch along the long edge, and so I'm good to go there. If you don't have a legal size piece of paper, you can just take 2 pieces of paper together and cut it to size. If you don't have paper, maybe you have a newspaper, you can use anything. And then the second piece is a 2.5 inch by 6 inch piece, and you're going to need to cut 2 of these. So you'll cut 1 of these and 2 of these out of your cloth. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is lay your material out, and if you have an iron your material before you start cutting on it, because it will make it easier. And all you do is you lay out your pattern like this, draw around it in pencil marks, and cut it out. So you'll need one 8 by 14 piece, and then you'll need two 2.5 by 6 inch piece. So just draw out your pattern in pencil. If you want to use chalk, that certainly comes out a lot easier than pencil. But just use whatever you have around the house. The whole point of this is for you to be able to make a mask and not have to go out and buy anything extra that you didn't already have on hand. Okay, so once you have your pieces cut, so here's the main 8 by 14 piece, and then I've got two 2.5 by 6 inch pieces. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take your big piece and you're going to fold it in half. And I like to iron the seams of this just so it stays nice and even. I don't like really
using pins and stuff when I sew things because I'm lazy. So if you iron it, it just keeps it in place a little better. So then once you're done with that, it will look something like this. Now don't worry, if you don't have a sewing machine, you can always hand stitch this. I would advise though, if you're stitching it and your stitches are really wide apart, maybe go over it 2 or 3 times. If you can get your stitches really close together, then you only have to do it once. So once you have that part done, then you go ahead and you turn it. So this is the reverse side. I guess I didn't mention that. It's easier to use fabric that looks the same on both sides because then you don't have to worry about front and back. So I should have said sew it inside out, but I'm just presuming that you have a single colored fabric like I do. So then you turn it inside in like this so you don't see your stitches, and then I would iron it flat again because it will make it a lot easier for the next part. Now the next part is making pleats. So this is what it's going to look like when you have it all pleated together. So these are basically just like that. You can see my pencil marks. That's how I marked out where I wanted my pleats to be. So I'm going to show you how to mark that out. I should have had this one ironed, so do as I say, not as I do. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a ruler and you're going to make, so this is basically my pleat pattern. So basically you're making 1-inch stripes, 3 of them, and then you're going to use that as your guide. So when I was looking up how to do how to make masks, a lot of them had this design with the pleats, and quite honestly, I was just really confused, and I struggled with it, maybe because I'm not necessarily a sewer. So I'm going to try to make this as easily understandable as possible. This part did confuse me too, so if you're confused, I guess you're not alone. So basically, you start, I don't think it matters whether you start at the top or the bottom because these pleats are going to be in the middle anyway. We'll start here, and you make marks at, I'm going to take that so it doesn't confuse you. I guess I should say I use this when I made a mask that was black and I couldn't see my marks, and I just use that as a guide. But if you have lighter colored fabric, this should be easy peasy. So make a mark at 1.5, 2.5, so that's the first inch, 3, leave a 1/2 inch gap, 4, that's your second inch, 4.5, that's your 1/2 inch gap, and then 5.5, and then that's your last inch. So you got boom, boom, boom. And do the same thing on the other side. 1.5, 2.5, skip to 3, 4, skip to 4.5, and then 5.5. Okay, so now we're going to make the pleats. So I'm going to start, and I don't think it really matters where you start, but I'm going to fold this dot to that dot and make a crease. And make sure you have your iron on. If you don't have an iron, you can always use pins to pin this together and keep it held together while you're sewing it. I just don't prefer to do that. So again, here's my finished one. So I ironed it so it's pretty much going to stay put, and then when I sew, I can just do that without pins. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate. So I guess first of all, before we start, because I really should have ironed this to begin with, I'm going to iron it flat like this. And then I'm going to take these two dots and match them up to the other two dots. So just like that. And then I'm going to iron it and try not to burn my fingers. Just like that. So I've got a nice crease in there. Okay, so here's the second one. So then I'm going to take this dot here, like that, and I'm going to move it up to this next dot, just like that. And then I'm going to iron it. I hope this is making sense to you. Okay, so then I'm going to take this, this last one right here, and kind of fold it over and match it up to the last dots. And then, if it's not perfect, do not worry about it. If it seems like a little crooked to you, seriously, do not worry about it. You do not have to have perfection on this. So there, now I have two, like that. So the next step is going to be sewing the edges so that it keeps the pleat, and then you're also going to sew on your elastic, or as I discussed before, if you don't have elastic, you can sew on your strings. Make sure to measure it to make sure that it has enough distance to go around your entire head and to make a bow or tie it however you want to. So I would always err on the sides of too large rather than too small, because you can always cut it down shorter, but you can't always make it larger. So again, some substitutes that you could use if you don't have elastic, which this is the elastic I'm using. This would be the ideal material, 1/4 inch elastic. So if you don't have that, you can use a bra strap. You could use one of those excuse me, stretchy elastic headbands that girls wear. You could use shoestrings and tie it behind. You could even, probably use yarn if you braided it together to make it a little more thick and durable. Really, you can just use whatever you have on hand. Okay, so we're ready to sew, and I've got 2 pieces of elastic there cut to 6.5 inches long. 6.5 inches is big enough to fit me. It's big enough, it fits my husband okay, and it fits my teenage son. However, I have a 9-year-old, and using this big did not work for him. So I made one that was 5.5 inches, and I kept the same size of this, same size everything else. I just made this shorter, 5.5 inches, and that seemed to fit his face okay. So if you're making this for a smaller child, you can just experiment with different sizes. I mean, maybe you cut this down a little shorter, maybe you make this a little shorter, but for my purposes, 6.5 inches works great for adult and teens, and 5.5 works great for children around the age of 9. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew it. So as I said, I do not like using needles when I sew. So I just kind of hold stuff in place and hope it works. So you're going to want to sew the elastic on fairly close to the edge, because you don't want, if you sew it too far down, you're going to have your edges kind of gap, and you don't want that. So let's get my pleats back in order. And so if you're using string instead of elastic, same placement and everything, nothing different. Okay, so put that down. You want to sew you know, maybe like a 1/2 inch up or whatever. It doesn't have to be perfect. You'll want to make your stitches, if you're using a sewing machine, you want to make your stitches maybe a little less tight because it's got a lot of fabric to get through. Also, I recommend going back and forth over the elastic parts especially so it holds them tighter. So I'm going to reverse, forward, reverse, forward. Okay, then we put this other edge, make sure there's no twists in it, and you're going to put it in about the same spot here. And again, reverse over it, go over it several times. Okay, so when it's all done, that's what it should look like on that side. And so I'm going to go ahead, oops, sorry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and then I'm going to show you how to put on that edging. In my case, it's black. Okay, so I have both sides on, keeping it to the same side, so make sure you don't accidentally flip it over and sew the other one on the back. So now it's time, I mean, if you wanted to be done with it now, you could. It just look a little sloppy. But the next part now is to put on the edging, which will go on either side like that and kind of hide your stitches. So what you do is you take your 2 pieces that you cut and then you fold them in half, and I've ironed them so that the creases stay in place. And the reason why you fold them in half is so that you don't have edges exposed, because what you're going to do is you're going to take this open edge with, you know, your rough fabric, and you're going to sew it like this. So the rough edge to the rough edge, and you're going to sew a seam like that fairly close to the edge. And then what you're going to do is, once it's sewn on that side, if I can demonstrate, you're going to fold it over like that, and then you're going to sew it on that side. So it's going to look something like that when you're done, but I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay, so first, the first step is going to be taking your folded piece, kind of centering it. Again, it doesn't matter because all these edges are going to be folded in anyway. So put it on there, and you're gonna, oops, sorry for bumping the camera again, you're going to sew. So you're gonna want to try to get it as close to this line you've already sewn as possible. And don't mind all my messy strings, I will cut those off eventually. As I said, I'm not a professional seamstress. So I think my line is about right there, so that's where I'm going to sew. Maybe I think I'm gonna edge it up just a wee little bit more, so I have plenty of room on the other side. Yep, I'm gonna do that because I want to have enough to fold over and make it look nice and finished. Okay, now we're ready to go. Okay, so if you're hand sewing this, obviously it's going to take you a lot longer. So now what you're going to do is you're going to fold it over like this, and I might actually cut off some of this extra so I have a little bit of, so it's not so bulky when I'm trying to sew this. So, I mean, this isn't, you don't officially have to do this. I'm just trying to make things easier on myself. I'm all about making things easy. I mean, this part is not going to show anyway. So so you're going to take it. Here's the opposite. Let me cut off that part. Okay, so you're going to take it, fold it, and then these ends are going to fold in like that. And if you have to use pins to hold it, so be it. I just am lazy like that. I don't like using pins. So like that. And then this top part is going to go over, and then you're going to sew it across, and hopefully these things aren't going to stick out. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to demonstrate what you're supposed to do. So I'm going to, I suppose I could iron this to make it easier, but this is the lazy way to make a mask. I'm going to kind of tuck those edges in so you don't see them. Hope that makes sense. Make sure your elastic or your strings are well out of the way so you don't sew them. Okay. I think, whoops. It's a little bit of finagling here. And again, you're sewing through a lot of layers of fabric, so on your sewing machine, make sure you're using a bigger stitch. Okay. So, cut these edges off. I realize this isn't perfect, but it's good enough. So here's what it looks like. So disregard my pencil marks from before, but that is what it looks like finished. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this other side, and then we'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. Okay, here we are on the other side, and my mask is done. And here you see some other examples that I've made. This one is a little fancier fabric, but they're very easy to do. The first one you do probably will take you a while, but then after that you can churn these out in probably about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments.